Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we are finishing our series of lessons on valleys and mountains with the most prominent and most important mountain, and that is Mount Moriah. And in Matthew chapter 16, we start at verse 24, and it says, "Then said Jesus unto his disciples, If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." Now, also in Romans chapter 12, verse 1 says, "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you what? Present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service." Now, the Christian life is a life of sacrifice. It's a life of taking up our cross, dying to self, and living unto God in newness of life. Mount Moriah is the mount of sacrifice. It speaks to us today, and if Mount Moriah could speak, it would say, take up your cross, die to this world, and live unto God. In Genesis 22, verses 1 and 2, it says, "And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, your only son, who you love, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee." Now, we first see Moriah in the sacrifice of Isaac upon the mount. Now, the term, the land of Moriah, because he says here, God says, get thee unto the land of Moriah, the land of Moriah. So, the land of Moriah seems to be the name of a country which had a mountain range in which eventually one of the mountains was specifically named Moriah. So, Abraham was to offer Isaac as a burnt offering on Mount Moriah. Now, you may say, if it was a mountain range, then which one? Well, like I said, eventually, specifically one mountain became named as Mount Moriah. And it was at Moriah where God's plan of a future substitute to take our place was revealed. Isaac was determined by God to die, but God provided a lamb to take his place. And we have to understand, this is the same thing. God has determined that the soul that sins, it shall die. We're all sinners. God has declared us to die. But in the midst of that, God has also designed that a substitute would take its place, as with Isaac. With every sacrifice, someone's faith will be tested. And Abraham's faith was tested with the sacrifice of Isaac. Now, if you go to 1 Chronicles chapter 21, and we'll read some portions of Scripture. It says here, 1 Chronicles chapter 21, in verses 4 through 8, David numbers the children of Israel. And God is displeased, and David realizes his sin. So David numbers the children of Israel. He wasn't supposed to do it. God is not happy. And now David realizes that he did wrong. All right. Now, in verses 11 and 12, God gives David a choice of 3 judgments. And in verse 13, David chooses to be put into the hand of God. He doesn't want to go into the hand of his enemies, and he doesn't want plagues coming in. He wants, because he knows that God is a merciful God, and that God will show kindness and mercy even in his judgment. And he said, put me into the hand of God. I'd rather be judged by God. Now in verse 18, David is now directed by God to set up an altar unto God on Ornan's threshing floor. All right, so verse 18 says, Then the angel of the Lord commanded Gad to say to David that David should go up and set up an altar unto the Lord in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Now, if you'd like to, I definitely encourage you to go on my YouTube channel, and you'll see extended teachings. I have a portion there. It's called Extended Teachings. If you click on that, you'll see in my extended teachings a message on Ornan the Jebusite, and it's a beautiful message. I definitely encourage you to listen to that, to watch that, and be blessed. It's a tremendous message. It goes into the history of Ornan a little bit, and it's just it ties in with this message a lot. But if you can, please, it would benefit you, it would bless you tremendously to pull up that message on Ornan the Jebusite and listen to that, okay? So he goes, and in verse 18, he's directed to go and build an altar at Ornan the Jebusite's threshing floor. Now, in verses 24 and 25, David buys Ornan's threshing floor. And then in verse 26, David offers burnt offerings and peace offerings, and God answers by fire upon the altar of burnt offerings. So David builds these altars. Why? To stay the judgment, to stop the judgment from happening to the children of Israel. Remember, the children of Israel, in a sense, represent all of us. We're all sinners. And judgment must take place, but an altar is to be set up. And as with Isaac, a substitute took his place, so also here in 1 Chronicles 21, an altar is built, a sacrifice is being made in order to stay the judgment. In verse 27, God commanded the end of the plague. Now, why is all of this important? Why are we dealing with Ornan's threshing floor? What does that have to do with Moriah, right? And what does that have to do with this message on Mount Moriah? Because the threshing floor of Ornan would be the eventual location of Solomon's temple. Now, Ornan the Jebusite sacrificed his ownership of the threshing floor and let David buy it. So the plague would be stopped and many people would be saved. The altar was built, animals were sacrificed, and the people were saved. Remember, we said Mount Moriah represents what? Represents sacrifice, dying to this world. Well, upon Mount Moriah, something's going to be sacrificed. And with Ornan the Jebusite, he sacrificed his threshing floor. He let David buy it. And then other sacrifices were made. Why? To prevent to stop the plague from continuing. Now in 2 Chronicles chapter 3, if we turn a few pages over, and we see 2 Chronicles chapter 3 and verse 1. This is beautiful. It says, Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord. All right? Solomon's temple is beginning to be built now. at Jerusalem, okay, at Jerusalem, in Mount Moriah. So Solomon is going to build his temple at Jerusalem, and it's going to be right at Mount Moriah, where Isaac was to be sacrificed, where the Lord appeared unto who? David his father. When did he appear unto David his father? In the place that David had appeared in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Ornan the Jebusite. So it all goes back to Ornan. Ornan the Jebusite. Again, you've got to listen to that message, Ornan the Jebusite. Pull it up on my extended teachings. It explains this even a little more deeper. But Ornan the Jebusite owned this land. And then he sold it to David. And the plague was stopped. The plague was stopped because sacrifices were made. Ornan made a sacrifice. The ram in the thicket was sacrificed on that mount for Isaac. Ornan sacrificed and sold his land. David sacrificed burnt offerings unto God for to stay the plague. What would become the epicenter of all of Israel, the Temple Mount, was built on Mount Moriah. The center of all religious activity, sacrifices and feasts would emanate from Mount Moriah, except when the children of Israel were disobedient and God drove them from the land. So again, Mount Moriah was the epicenter of all of the nation of Israel, of all Jewish people. Now we go to Calvary. What is the location of Calvary? Some scholars believe that Calvary and Mount Moriah are the same location. But it's not certain exactly where Calvary was located. We do know that Calvary was close to Jerusalem, but it was also near a roadway, because the Bible does say that people walked by Jesus' cross when he was hanging on the cross. Remember, Jesus was crucified outside the city limits of Jerusalem at that time. So we don't know exactly where Calvary was. We do know it was outside the city, and we do know it was near a roadway. Now we come to the subject of myrrh. When Jesus was born, the wise men came and they brought gold and frankincense and myrrh. Now you may say, what does myrrh have to do with Mount Moriah, right? And with sacrificing? Well, it is believed that myrrh and Moriah are from the same Hebrew root word, which is mor, M-O-R. Myrrh and Moriah, it's believed, stemmed from the same root word in Hebrew, mor. And therefore, myrrh is associated with the ram in the thicket and with Jesus' crucifixion. Myrrh was used for a lot of things back in Jesus' time, but its main use, the main use of myrrh, was that it was an embalming fluid. It was used to help bury the dead, to prepare a dead body for going into the grave. In John 19, verse 39, myrrh was mixed with aloes, 100 pounds weight. Myrrh, when myrrh was brought to Jesus, when he was born in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, when myrrh was brought to him, it was prophesying of Jesus' death. So myrrh is very much associated with Christ's death and also with Mount Moriah. Now, Mount Moriah is the Mount of Sacrifice. The ram was sacrificed for Isaac. Ornan sacrificed by selling his land. David sacrificed animals in order to stay the plague. The temple was built and animals were sacrificed. And also Jesus Christ himself was sacrificed. Again, as we said at the beginning, if Mount Moriah could speak, it would say to everyone in the world, especially to Christians, take up your cross, die to this world, and live unto God. Take up your cross, die to this world, and live unto God. God bless you.